Welcome, everyone, to Mythstorie, a podcast about myths and history. I am one of your hosts, Bryant. Joining me is as I call her, my permanent guest, Cammy. Hello, Cammy.
Hello, Bryant. How are you?
I'm very tired. In fact, I almost meant to tell you before we started recording, if we don't record soon, I'm going to fall asleep. But don't worry. I know the part two, Adventures of Sinbad, is going to keep me up and at them.
Just mute in case you start snoring.
Right. Yes, I'm pretty good about that. So yes, this is Mythstorie. This is part two of our Sinbad episode. So please jump on to part one if you don't want to spoil yourself that way. But if you are joining us, this is a podcast about myths and history. We try and cover any legend, myth, history, tale, what have you, give you a story, and then we'll kind of talk about it a little bit. And we started last week's episode is discussing the story of Sinbad the Sailor from Arabian Nights or 1001 Nights, whatever you prefer to call it. And it's interesting story, the interesting story, the seven stories. Cammy's sort of paraphrase them in a great way. And now we're going to go on from part two, if I remember right. Yeah, and remind us what we kind of talked about last week.
Yeah, so Sinbad had a porter come to his house. His name was Sinbad. And I know, isn't it weird? I think in some and all this is from Arabian Nights, but I think that in some translations it's also Sinbad. So there was like some sort of, oh, woe is me, like why is this person rich and I'm poor and they have the same name as me?
Oh, sure. Okay.
Yeah, I think that was like part of it. So he had three different adventures last time. There was a giant whale, and there was a cyclops, for lack of a better word. And then he also found himself at the bottom of a ravine where he had to get himself lifted up by an eagle by tying himself to a bit of meat. So that's kind of his journeys. I mean, in every single one of them, he's been shipwrecked. So this guy doesn't have the best of luck, but it always works out in the end.
Right, yeah.
So that's part of it. But yeah, so Sinbad, never satisfied with home, ventured out again to the sea that was calling him, but the ship he chose was tossed into a sandbank. Many of the crew died in the crash, and all of the cargo was tossed to the sea. Some of the crew, including Sinbad himself, escaped the sea with a plank. They landed on an island where they were taken prisoner and fed a concoction that caused them to lose their senses. Then they were fed rice to fatten them for eating. Sinbad refused the concoction and pretty much all of the food, except for just enough to stay alive. After most of his crew was eaten, he was able to escape and live on coconuts until he found some friendly strangers who spoke his tongue. They took Sinbad onto their ship to a beautiful island. The prince of this island befriended Sinbad quickly. After our hero introduced a saddle, which they had previously rode bareback on horses. So he introduced the idea of a saddle, and the prince just absolutely adored it. So he implored Sinbad just to make him stay there to marry a beautiful woman that lived on the island. He agreed and lived happily there for a time until his wife perished. It was the custom in this land for the spouse of the deceased to be buried with them. Sinbad was thrown into a pit with his dead wife. He was given sparse provisions to survive a few days, but as luck would have it, a new couple was introduced to the cave a few days later. The man had died, and his wife was in there alive. Sinbad quickly killed the woman and took her food. He repeated this process every time a new person was introduced to the cave. Luckily for everyone, a sea creature appeared in the cave and showed Sinbad a way out to the sea.
That is lucky.
He came back to rid the bodies of their jewels and sat on the shore waiting for a ship to pass. One did, and after he flagged it down, he told the captain that he had been shipwrecked carrying jewels to sell in Baghdad. The captain, by some miracle, believed him and took him home. Now, Sinbad's at home. He's giving away his jewels just like he did last time to the poor and whatever, keeping some for himself. But he quickly forgot his troubles abroad and decided he wanted to set sail again, for adventure was calling him. On the voyage, the ship landed at the island where Sinbad had encountered the roc before. That was the large bird. The, not an actual roc.
Right, or Dwayne Johnson.
Right. The crew, not heeding his warning, found a rock egg, smashed it up, and cooked it for dinner. It wasn't long before the parents came back, and seeing their young destroyed, they flew off in sorrow. The crew packed up quickly and left the island to try to escape their fate. They were not successful. After a few short hours had passed, the two rocs came for revenge. They dropped stones onto the ship, breaking it into 1,000 pieces. Sinbad found himself on another island. This time he was not alone. He met an old man who, without speaking, made Sinbad carry him on his shoulders. When Sinbad wanted to rest, the old man would kick him and force him to move. By luck, Sinbad found himself in a position to make wine, using a dried gourd and grapes he had found on the island. So this had gone on for, I don't know, several weeks or whatever. So after a few days, after making the wine was ready to drink, and Sinbad drank it heartily. The old man wanted to try the wine as well, so Sinbad gave it to him. It made him very drunk, so that he fell off our hero, who quickly bludgeoned him to death. He is such a murderous bastard.
Yeah.
By luck, the next morning, a ship landed there, and the crew aboard listened to Sinbad's tale. They said he had killed the old man of the sea. Sinbad traveled back with these men, collecting coconuts by antagonizing monkeys to the point where they threw the nuts down at the group. They then sold the nuts for a considerable fortune before taking him home. It wasn't long before Sinbad went out again. For what purpose, even he could scarcely say. His last voyage ended in him giving most of his procured wealth to charity. He had so much excess. Nevertheless, he went back to sea. There, of course, was another shipwreck. He outlasted the crew stranded with him in the cave while they were tossed where they were tossed by hiding his provisions. So there was like this cave that the ship crashed in. All the crew was dying because they were just like eating everything they had, and he was like hiding his stuff.
Mm-hmm.
He then realized, after everyone else had died, the river flowing through this cave, it's like just a moment too late.
Yeah.
That the river flowing through this cave must have an out somewhere. He made a raft and floated down this river. He fell asleep, and when he woke, he found himself in the open. He met some people who spoke his language, and they took him to meet their king. The king showered Sinbad with gifts and asked him on his way home to deliver an offering to the caliph, Harun al-Rashid. He did this for the king. The caliph let the king into his rule after receiving these gifts, and Sinbad returned home. Sinbad was now content to stay in Baghdad, for he was old and tired of adventure. The caliph implored him to do one more errand for him before he gave up his precious life for good. He was to return the favor of the rich king had given him, or had given the caliph. Sinbad embarked on his journey and did what he was asked. He was given many gifts by the king to thank him for his trouble. As he sailed for home, Sinbad's ship was overtaken by pirates who took him into slavery. Our not so heroic hero found himself in the position as a slave to kill elephants for their tusk. After several days of doing this, the elephants had an idea. They tore him down from the tree where he perched himself to shoot them down with arrows. The tree was uprooted with their precious tusk. The elephants then carried Sinbad to their graveyard. This way, Sinbad could collect ivory without killing them. For this, he was freed from slavery because he gave the king the information, and was given ivory to take back to his home. Sinbad, having finished his tales to Hindbad, told him to always come to his table for meals and to quit his life as a porter. That's where we're ending the story.
Wow, cool.
Yeah, he kept giving Hindbad stuff. Every time he told him something, he would give him like 100, whatever their currency was. And so maybe he was like rich enough after 7 stories to, quit being a porter or whatever.
Yeah, I didn't see anything. I was wondering if the 7 stories, like if 7 was magic number here. But I didn't see anything that kind of talked on that. There may be something there, but I didn't. But I like that. I didn't realize, looking into Sinbad more, I didn't realize how popular it was. There was a bunch of like, kind of like how some of the other Arabian Night stuffs, like Alibaba, has been turned into really crappy animations in the last like 100 years. Sinbad is definitely a part of that. So, but he seems to be more like fondly kind of talked about. But he hasn't been like, there was the big movie by the people that did like the Prince of Egypt and.
Was that like DreamWorks or something?
Yeah, one of it was
Or the other
was,
one?
the 90s people, those films, where they would like go to exotic places and then everyone who did voices would be famous white actors. But anyway, they were great though. Those movies are great.
I think I watched that. It didn't follow the story really at all.
I'm sure it wouldn't. Yeah.
Yeah, like at all. There was
I'm sure.
nothing.
Yeah. It's just kind of like a name.
Yeah, he was like a thief or something, like
right.
or a pirate or something.
Sure, yeah. He's Sinbad the Sailor, and I'll say it too. Like I see it a lot. It kind of like goes from website to website. Like Sinbad with the D seems to be like more accurate to the name. I don't know why it got changed to Sinbad and from Sindbad. I like, so one article that I really liked was from this website thoughtco.com. Callie, and she's got a great name. Szyspansky, I think that's like a Slavic name. Like it starts with a lot of Z's and C's. She did a great write up, and she's like a professor of history and PhD and all that. So I really enjoyed her piece. But she talks about the name. It seems to come from Persian origins, which we kind of discussed last week. This takes place in the places of what was like Persia and is now like modern Iraq and things like that. But Sinbad meaning Lord of the Sind River, and Sindhu is the Persian variant of the Indus River, indicating that he was a sailor from the coast of what is now Pakistan. So this would also support, and this would support the Persian origins. Remember, this is 1001 Nights, which is just, I talked about it a little last week, but a huge collaborative of stories that are ancient in themselves in some cases, which Sinbad was one that was. The stories come from, they can be, some of them are considered ancient and some are from ancient Persian, some are Hebrew, some are even Greek in origin, but they all sort of have Arabian or Arabic kind of focal point, especially kind of the later translations. But it's interesting because some of the, I looked at mainly like Britannica, Wikipedia, but then this ThoughtCo article as well. They note that Sinbad was a late addition and that it's actually not really included in the more traditional Arabic translations, and in general, the 1001 Nights or Arabian Nights stories seem to really be more of a Western thing than anything. I remember talking about this on our Alibaba episode, which again was a really fun tale and intro into this. But these stories, when they were translated like 17th, 18th centuries by the Western world, the Western world really took it, and I think it was a great introduction to these lands. These are great stories in general, in the way that they work, and so I think that it just makes sense that that's how that would be. But they've really taken like a Western take, or a Western like heir to them in a lot of ways. Like we,
I have a question.
yeah.
So, Alibaba was more of a Western story too, right?
I'd have to
Or
go
do you
back to my
remember?
notes.
Yeah, I don't
Yeah,
remember.
it
But it was a later story, correct?
yeah, it was more modern. So like, I think that we've what did we say? So like, it's thought of that this story takes place in what, the ninth century, I think. Isn't that when Harun al
This,
Rashad?
yeah, this one definitely does take place in the
Um,
9th century.
yeah, so like around 800. So Harun al Rashad, who was mentioned in the story. Oh, I love that too. They use his civilization picture when I Google him. Sid Meier. He's a great in Sid Meier. Gets you lots of gold. Good in trading. Um, he Harun al Rashad was the Caliph of Baghdad from 763 to 809, and so you mentioned him in the story, and it's sort
Right.
of believed that that's kind of, I imagine that's when these stories were kind of written, took place, that kind of thing.
It
So
just seems to me like the later edition stories are more popular
yeah,
because
sure.
Aladdin was added later too, right? Because it was like originally a Chinese story.
Yeah, I imagine we were just talking about how we should definitely touch on Aladdin soon, but I do know for certain that Aladdin is a Chinese like original story, or it's set in China. I actually, well, this will be a fun episode because I just clicked Aladdin, but it's set in China. I don't know if it's actually Chinese in origin, so that'll be another episode. But yeah, but Sinbad, it's like I said, it's interesting because even in the Arabic translations, it's not really included. It's sort of its own thing. It's taken on its own way, but it's still really fun. I did find out just for kicks too. The comedian Sinbad,
Hmm.
his name is David Adkins. he
Really?
yes, yeah, he actually took
And
that
here he
name.
is now.
Yeah, hey David, thanks for coming in. No, I'm sure he would. He wouldn't mind.
Oh yeah, he's a lovely person, I'm sure.
Um, he was great. What was that movie with Arnold Schwarzenegger? Jingle All the Way. Loved it. He changed. He took the stage name Sinbad, and it was in like because of the stories of Sinbad. So he just admired this guy who shipwrecked a dozen times and made it every time, no matter what. So going further though, I mean it's pretty straightforward about Sinbad. We've the articles and things that I read, they sort of posit that it doesn't have the same historical roots that some of these other stories in A Thousand and One Nights, Arabian Night stories might be. So it's more likely that it's just a matter of, I mean, during the seventh, eighth, ninth century, it was very, trade was huge in this period. I mean, if you think of Southeast Asia, West Asia, Middle East, you know, these deep, rich civilizations, lots going on. I could totally see someone making these great stories. And we've mentioned the Odyssey before, and well, I have found that it looks like the Odyssey. So fairytalefandom.com. It's like a fairy tale wiki, mythology wiki kind of place. It discusses that Homer's epics um, were long familiar in the Arabic world, having been translated into that language as long ago as the 8th century. So if we're thinking about the setting of this, I mean, I could totally see someone reading this in 700s in Persian, lands like Iraq and all that, and then being like, "Yo, what if this guy Sinbad?" Like
Yeah,
merchants
it's
were.
kind of like what Virgil did.
Yeah, exactly. That's a great way of putting it. I mean, merchants and trade, like the world was becoming more and more known, but it was still really mysterious. But the kind of the existence of these other nations were really big. So it just kind of makes sense that Sinbad would base off on these general things. Um, and I mean, just because merchants in general and uh, complicated trade networks and things like that. ThoughtCo does talk about a Persian adventurer and trader named Suleiman al-Tajir, which means Solomon the Merchant. I think I mentioned this last week,
Yeah, you
but
did mention it last week. Yeah.
he traveled from Persia all the way to southern China around the year 775. So he would probably be a big big deal, and could easily have kind of inspired that for sure. So there doesn't seem like there was a direct Sinbad. This is a pretty complicated time. I want to notice one thing that was really cool that you mentioned, the Rock, R-O-C, or
Right,
Rook.
yeah.
Rook is another pronunciation,
It's
R-U-K-H.
probably the pronunciation of it. I
Yeah.
probably pronounced it wrong.
No, yeah. Well, those are really cool. So these I don't know if it was Final Fantasy or something, but they've definitely been featured as like simple baddies in a video game. But they're a cool, simple, just big bird myth. Okay, I mean, I would say they're like a unicorn almost in their ideas, and in fact, rocks were they were believed to have been around, and like they would palm fronds were given to cons, and they were like, "Oh yeah, this is the feather of a rock." That's and it reminded me of we talked about unicorns. They would get narwhals' tusks, the tooth of the narwhal, that the horn, and they would be like, "Yo, unicorn horn here. This will help you get boners again." And they'd be like, "Whoa," and that's kind of what these people were doing with the rocks. But they're cool. They're of an Arabic Persian origin. They're literally just giant birds, but they were said to be so big that they could carry an elephant in their talons.
Oh yeah, the one from the previous story that they were talking about. I remember the crew told a story about how the rock would like kind of circle overhead, and the rhinoceros and the elephant who were mortal enemies would start fighting, and then the rock would come down, like swoop down and pick them both up.
All right, you two. What's really cool about the rock too is that in 1298, this dude named Marco Polo, he actually described the rock as living in Madagascar, and this is from Mythology Wikia. This might have been home to an extinct bird called the elephant bird, a 9-foot tall flightless bird. Yeah, 9 foot. Some of the world's largest eagles, like the elephant bird, are now extinct. Once lived in Madagascar as well. So they were huge, but they were flightless, and they fed off of other flightless birds. So it's interesting. That one of these big flightless birds might have been the inspiration for rock, but I don't know. There's the big fascination on the giant egg too, in a lot.
That area of the world, I mean, aren't there a lot of like well-preserved dinosaur bones and stuff?
Sure. Oh yeah. That's
they
how
might
dragons
have dug up whatever.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. I wonder why it was flightless. That's interesting. I just realized that now.
Because its bones aren't hollow.
Or because it's so huge. Yeah. I don't know. Like,
yeah. I mean, you'd have to
big,
be like, yeah.
To be able to fly. Yeah. But yeah. So Sinbad, it's a pretty cool story. It was a late edition, not even recognized really in the Arabic translations, like I guess you could say the modern or current translations of 1001 Nights. I don't know what the perspective is on 1001 Nights. There's some cool allusions to the Odyssey and some other kind of big things, and because the Odyssey was introduced in as long as the 8th century at the court of Caliph al-Mahdi, which is in Iran in 754. So I could totally see it making circuits, the story making circuits around. I mean, like, this is this time period is just so busy, and so, I mean, they all are, but it's just crazy to think. It's hard to pinpoint. Like when we talk about Hercules, it's sort of easy because it seems like there's a more finite amount of material and sources, but this is just such a hodgepodge. The stories of the Arabian Nights themselves are such a huge collection in general, so it's hard to say. Yeah, it was in Southeast Asia in this temple. There was a reference. It's more just based on the story itself and the fact that it carried on for so long. So I really like it. I hope Sinbad, they do something with it soon. Maybe they can, when they finish the John Henry movie, they can add him to.
Did you say that was up on Netflix?
Yeah, so the so we did an episode on John Henry that was great, and Netflix just aired Terry Crews's film, but Netflix,
Oh, okay, okay.
yes, but Netflix is going to make a new the way I read it, it's like they want to make like a Marvel Cinematic Universe style, but for like folklore. So 1,000% Sinbad's going to be in this. So, but I think that if I remember right, Dwayne Johnson is supposed to play John Henry, or at least he's a part of it. But it could be John Henry, Sinbad, uh, fighting rocks, trying to pick up their elephants. They could totally do that. But yeah, so well, Cammy, thanks for your stories on Sinbad. I can't stress enough though. I really like the Sinbad story, but the Alibaba and the 40 Thieves, so good. Please go back and listen to that episode. Like if you're listening to this now, you've stuck with us. Go back and listen.
Listen at least to the very end of the second episode.
Yeah,
because
yeah,
that's
the
what
second
Bryant's
episode,
talking about.
so
Just
good.
out of
It was
nowhere.
great. It was really great. So, and thanks for bearing with us. I don't think I've mentioned the last couple episodes, but we're recording through Skype because of quarantine stuff. We're still social distancing and stuff like that. It's probably going to continue for a little while at least. But I think it's been working well enough. We got some new mic equipment, so when we are together again, it'll sound great. But I don't think it's sounding too bad. But if you have any suggestions or critiques or anything, let us know. We have our Facebook group, Mythstorie. Mythstorie is spelled with an IE, but it's all one word. And you can hit us up at mythstorie@gmail.com as well. So, Cammy, I think that about does it. Thanks again so much for everything.